I was not expecting this backstory to be nearly as good as it was. It is already one of my favorite One Piece backstories, and the craziest part about it is I was not happy to be getting a backstory at this point in the arc. But after watching it, oh my goodness, I'm so happy we got this backstory at this point in the arc. I mean, we all make mistakes. Mine just happened to be a little bit too often, but I digress. To kind of understand the reason I wasn't necessarily that thrilled about getting a backstory at this point in the arc is because things are right at their darkest. Things were heating up. You have Eneru destroying all of Skypiea. You have Luffy running up a giant beanstalk because he knows at the top of that beanstalk, that's where Eneru is heading, because they're both heading for this giant gold bell. And even part of me was wondering, like, okay, why does everyone care so much about this gold bell? But so many questions I had were answered with this backstory, so I was so happy after watching this backstory, despite the fact that this backstory kind of depressed me, to be honest. It was harder hitting than any backstory I've seen so far in One Piece, and I think a big part of the reason for that is because not only is the backstory sad, but it ends sad, and the characters involved in the backstory, their lives didn't end happy, whereas when we see the Straw Hats, their backstories, they all have incredibly sad moments, but you know they have a brighter future ahead of them. But anyway, let's get into the backstory because, oh yeah, this was incredible. You have our two main characters of the backstory. You have Calgara and you have Noland. Now, we've been introduced to Noland more so because of the Jaya arc in Cricket. It has been a while since I watched that, so I was kind of forgetting about Noland, but then when his name was brought up, I was like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot everything that led to them even going up into the sky. It was when they met Cricket, they heard his story, they heard about Noland. So again, some of the details about Noland you kind of knew, and you kind of know roughly how the backstory ends, but so many of the details I was not expecting. I didn't think it would be nearly as depressing as it was when I got to the end. But again, the fact that this backstory was so impactful makes everything that happens in the final conflict that much more meaningful. It also explains so many characters that I was kind of sympathetic towards, but this makes me way more sympathetic, like Wiper and the Shandians, and just... Anyway, I need to get into the backstory. I'm rambling a little too much now. Again, I like that we get introduced to these two characters in very different ways. The first impressions you get of Calgara is he's definitely a great warrior, and you see him defending his homeland from people who I guess are adventurers or something, looking for gold. So he'll do what it takes to defend his homeland. And he's not that friendly to outsiders, which isn't necessarily the greatest combo for making new friends. But speaking of new friends, let's go to his soon-to-be new friend, Noland. Now, I must admit, I was wildly impressed with Noland right from the start, because the first thing you see, he dives into the ocean, kills a sea king. Like, that's wildly impressive. Comes up. His men can then eat the Sea King, but quickly you see, like, okay, he's a very nice guy, he cares for his crew. His crew clearly respects him, but at nighttime, they get hit by this storm, and they're in some danger. I don't really know how much for sure, but they're in a little bit of danger in this storm. And this is when Noland hears a bell. And the detail I love the most about this bell is that it's almost like it's calling to him in particular. And learning more about the bell, it makes sense. But again, at this point, going into the backstory, I was like, okay, why do I care so much about this bell? Or why should I care this much about a bell? In fact, after this backstory, it makes me realize how stupid I was for not caring nearly enough about that bell. Like, I thought, like, oh, you know, it's more gold. No, this thing is important, very much so. Again, keep in mind, when I say stupid stuff, we all make mistakes. But again, the bell is calling to Noland, not just for his sake, but also the Shandians' sake, so it needs him to go and meet the Shandians, and it'll become clear very fast why, but it's interesting that none of his other crew hears the bell. They think he's maybe mishearing something. Even when they arrive on the island that was calling to him, they're like, you must have been mishearing something. But no, then you hear the bell, and everyone finds the sound of the bell incredibly pleasant. But again, it becomes pretty clear, and I love this, why they were supposed to come to this island, because they quickly see the people there are afflicted with a horrible plague. Now on the positive, because Noland is a botanist and he knows all about plants and cures and stuff like that, and he knows what afflicts them, he knows what the cure is. So he helps out this one boy. But again, the Shandians are desperate at this point. They don't know what's happening to them. They think it must be a curse from the gods. So they assume, well, if we offer a sacrifice to the gods, we'll be fine. And this is when you have kind of an interesting scenario, which again, this is how Noland is going to meet Calgara. And let's just say they don't meet as friends, which I love those kind of stories where they start out as enemies or they don't get along, but over time they come to understand each other. But again, Noland doesn't even think twice. Again, it's usually not the best idea to just insert yourself into another culture's practices, but again, he's not thinking of consequences. He just sees a giant snake that they view as their god is about to eat this helpless girl that's being offered as a sacrifice. So he quickly kills this snake, which again is wildly impressive. The more I see of Noland, the more I'm starting to realize, like, he was really strong. I mean, Zoro couldn't even harm the snake up in Skypiea, which granted, they're not exactly the same snake. I mean, it's hard to tell, like, were they similar power levels? I assume so, because I guess it's kind of also showing, like, okay, this guy Noland is very strong. He kind of upsets a lot of the Shandians because not only did he stop one of their practices, their sacrifices, but he killed one of their gods, so that's not a great way of ingratiating yourself to the people. And this is when Noland comes face to face with Calgara for the first time. It's not a great first impression. In fact, Calgara even ends up stabbing Noland. But because he's such a Chad, you know, he shakes it off like it's barely an inconvenience. But they're talking, and the Shandians at this point have taken Noland's men prisoner, so his actions had some immediate consequences. Because again, not only did his actions put his life in danger, now all of his crew are also in danger, but he starts pleading with them. He's telling them about the fact that he knows how to save them. He's just asking them for time so he can save them because he's a man of science and he believes in progress and all this stuff. And you just see that stark contrast between this man of science who doesn't really believe in gods and sacrifices and all sorts of sacred things. And then you have Calgara, who very much the opposite of that. So it's kind of like oil and water. You don't think that they would mix very well. But regardless, the chief of this village decides, okay, I believe you. I can tell that you're being very sincere. I'll give you a day. Go out and find whatever you need to try and save our people. If you can, then obviously that would be great. If you can't, then your men will be sacrificed. So Noland sets out, and I do love this brief conversation we get between the chief and Calgara, where the chief basically just tells him, like, hey, I listened to him. I could tell he was being sincere. You've got to learn how to do that, which will become important. But again, Noland finds what he was looking for. He's heading back at this point, and things almost seemed like they were too easy, and that's when you have this giant earthquake. And this is when Calgara is just like, oh, this must be a sign from the gods. We were doing the wrong thing. He rushes out because he assumes at this point, like, he's going to go and kill Noland. The gods want him to kill Noland, which again, you can kind of feel for Calgara because he doesn't really know how to save his people. He just wants to do anything he can to help them. And he genuinely believes in the power of sacrificing to the gods. But he goes out there and he finds Noland. And the thing is, Noland is wedged between two pieces of land. And even I had a moment where I was like, man, that's just unlucky. Like, maybe you did actually anger these gods. Like, I didn't really believe in them, but that was so incredibly unlucky. But what I love so much about this moment is instead of Noland just being able to easily return, heal everyone in the village, instead it leads to some massive character development by Calgara, because the fate of everyone here is resting in his hands. If he trusts what Noland is saying and he can look past his own beliefs and just his view of outsiders, and if he can kind of just listen to Noland and see, is he telling the truth? If he can do that, then the people will be saved. So Noland is pleading with him. He's telling him, like, hey, I've got the cure in my hand. Like, please, can you help me out? And Calgara's not really sure, and the longer Noland talks, you could tell the more conflicted Calgara becomes, because he's like, I don't know, maybe it's possible. Maybe he can save my people. And this is where another snake or another Shandian god emerges, and it looks like it's going to kill Noland. He can't protect himself. And I love this because it forces Calgara to make a split-second decision. he's got to act. Either he's going to let Noland die, and who knows, maybe that will lead to the death of his people. He doesn't fully know if Noland is telling the truth, but in that split second, he decides he's going to put aside his own beliefs because he trusts Noland, and he kills the snake. And he even tells him, like, don't you understand what I did? I killed one of our gods. Please. And he's breaking down. Please tell me you can save my people. And boy, I love that moment. And Noland says, yes, he can, which he can. He gets him out. Noland goes, gets the cure for everyone. And at that point, I just love seeing the celebration. And you could tell, like, okay, immediately they became friends. And it was just such a happy moment. And they shared more moments together. I love even small details in this. Like Noland's crew shares pumpkins with them, which, you know, pumpkins kind of become, well, not important, but it was a little thing that they valued up in Skypiea. And Noland and Calgara just become best of friends. I mean, so much so that Calgara actually offers his daughter to Noland. That was the girl that Noland saved. He offers her, is like, hey, you can marry her. Which, I mean, Noland refuses because he's already married and he's got a kid back home. Which makes sense because he has to have descendants. But again, it's an indication that they're such good friends. He actually wants Noland to become part of the family. But then things go from very heartwarming to very fascinating and interesting. Because Calgara decides he trusts them, he wants to show them their prized City of Gold, what they've been protecting, Shandora. And he even says, because you saved us, you guys can have as much gold as you want, which of course they're very happy about. But what he says is perhaps the most interesting part about this whole backstory. Because Noland's like, are you sure? Like, this stuff is very valuable. Calgara tells him they're not actually guarding the gold. It's a city of gold. But what they're guarding and what they value the most is a poneglyph. And when he shows him the poneglyph and that it's technically in the gold bell, immediately it clicks like, oh my goodness, this gold bell is even more important than I was assuming. Because not only is the gold bell very important symbolically, but more so because of the poneglyph. And the poneglyphs have become one of the most fascinating things about One Piece to me, because I'm just genuinely curious what exactly is going on with them. I mean, it was such a massive part of the Alabasta arc, even though most of the characters didn't really know about it or care about it. All of the stuff that happened in Alabasta was because Crocodile desperately wanted to get that poneglyph. He wanted to read it. He wanted to get the information it had, particularly because he thought it pointed to a weapon. What was it? Pluton. And the thing is, the longer Calgara talks, the more fascinating this particular poneglyph, but not just this one, but all of them become. Because he says Shandora fought and fell to protect this poneglyph, which opens up so many things. Like, okay, on the one hand, why were people trying to get their hands on the poneglyph or destroy this poneglyph? Like, are they trying to stop people from getting certain valuable information? And it seems like this probably also points to another maybe weapon of mass destruction or something like that. And it even opens up so many questions like, are we sure that this information should be learned? Or is this the kind of stuff that it's probably better off if nobody really knows about it? Calgara even talks more about the bell and how it proclaims the existence of Shandora, which, if anything, proclaiming the existence of Shandora is more important now in our current storyline with Luffy than it's ever been. Because again, it's way up in the sky. Most people don't even know it exists. You have Cricket in the Blue Sea who thinks he's looking for a city of gold in the ocean. Meanwhile, if that bell is rung, you know it will proclaim that the city of gold is up in the sky. And whoever needs to hear it will be able to hear that bell. So again, I love that that immediately adds so much weight to the fight Luffy has with Eneru. Like, on the one hand, you have to beat Eneru because he's the villain and because if he wins, he'll destroy everything. On the other hand, though, this adds even more stakes to their fight. But again, Luffy can ring that bell and proclaim the city of gold is here. Anyway, so it seems like everything is great, but then all of a sudden things turn. And it seems like the Shandians really hate Noland and his crew for something that they did. Which again, it's not really clear why. It is one of those things where it's just a misunderstanding. If they just have a conversation, they'll be able to get to the bottom of it. But it seems like Noland and Calgara, they're not going to end on good terms. In fact, Calgara basically says he knows if he looks at him, he'll probably kill him. So what did he do that was so wrong? But then you see from Calgara's perspective, they cut down their sacred trees. But even learning that and knowing what I know about Noland, I was like, no, certainly he must have an incredibly good reason why he cut them down. Now, that's not to say he should have cut them down without asking them or telling them about it, because, again, you don't know what's sacred here or not, but it even shows the differences in their cultures and how improbable it is that they became best of friends. But Noland is setting sail soon, and it seems like they're going to set sail as enemies again, not as friends. But thankfully, Calgara's daughter, and thank you for this, she actually decides she's going to go and talk to one of Noland's crewmen. And she tells them about why they're upset about how they cut down their sacred trees. And immediately this guy realizes like, okay, yeah, that was probably a mistake not to tell you. But he does tell her the reason that they cut down the trees is because Noland would never hurt any forest. But the thing is, those trees were dead and those trees were diseased. So he needed to make sure that this disease was eradicated from this land so that the Shandians would be saved. And it just makes perfect sense. Again, it's a shame that it was a lack of communication that caused this. But at the same time, I love that as Noland is setting sail with his crew, you have Calgara's daughter, and she tells him exactly like, oh, this was a big misunderstanding. And he doesn't even pause. He runs straight to the shore. And I must admit, there was part of me which wondered like, oh, are they never going to have that last conversation where they just say like, hey, I understand now. I'm not upset with you. I did think like, okay, maybe they would just leave on bad terms and it would make this backstory even more depressing. But thankfully, that wasn't the case. As the Shandians start ringing the bell, so Noland can hear it and he's wondering like, what's going on? Why are they ringing the bell? And he turns and he looks at the coast and here comes Calgara. And again, he just yells Noland's name. And he doesn't even have to say much, but he says, come back again. And he starts bawling his eyes out. And he's just like, please come back again, friend of mine. And just seeing how he's just basically in shambles because he loves his friend that much. And then Noland's response where he doesn't even need to say much, but he's just crying his eyes out as well. And he also falls to his knees. And it's just such a beautiful show of friendship that they have. Or I should say family, because that's a big theme of One Piece, is family is really the friends that you make. And Noland says, yes, of course I'll come back. And I just love, he's sailing away and Calgara is saying, I'll keep ringing this bell. I'll keep ringing it so that you don't get lost. You know the way back. And I'm realizing like, oh my goodness, it's setting up what's going to happen next. Because, well, one, you know, they're never going to meet again. Even in this moment, you know, yeah, this is probably the last time they ever see each other. But again, in Calgara's mind, the fact that he said like, I'll just keep ringing that bell. And then knowing what happens next even makes it so much more impactful, but also more depressing at the same time. But anyway, some time goes by. And this is where Noland shows the fact that he's so honest. It's actually honesty to a fault, because he's telling everyone his stories, which some of them believe like, okay, he must be lying about some of them. But the thing is, nobody has proof that he's lying. They just are crazy stories. But he comes before the king and he tells him about this city of gold. And I was definitely frustrated watching this because it's like, why are you telling everyone about the city of gold? You would think you would kind of put it together and be like, well, if I tell a whole bunch of people about the city of gold, that will put the residents of that city in grave danger. And sure enough, the king wants to go. Eventually, Noland takes the king and a bunch of soldiers. Again, why do you need those soldiers? Surely it's not for peaceful things. But again, Noland doesn't put any of that together. He's heading to the city of gold. He wants to just say hi to his friend. He's not really thinking about the gold or anything like that. With the fact that this entire land of Shandora gets shot way up into the sky, I do wonder if to a certain extent that protected the Shandians and the history that they were protecting. Now that might sound a little funny because immediately they lose their land once they go up there. But the thing is, Noland is going to show this king and a bunch of his men this prized city of gold. They'll probably end up attacking the Shandians. And even if they can't defeat the Shandians, it will confirm to a lot of people that the city of gold is actually real. And you could imagine just nations from around the world will be sending tons of troops to this place. Because again, it's a city of gold. So in some ways, I do wonder if it would actually save them in a weird way. Although, not that the alternative to what happens to them is much better. I was just thinking like maybe there is a positive. Maybe it's like the world of One Piece itself decided, okay, I've got to step in because what's going to happen is not good. And I've got to preserve this history and this people. So when Noland arrives, he just sees they're all gone. The worst part about it is not the fact that he probably looks like a liar to everyone and it leads to his execution. The worst part about it is he doesn't know what happened to his friend, to any of the Shandians. He doesn't know if they're alive, if they're dead, if they're in trouble. He doesn't know any of this. It only gets even sadder and sadder the more you think about it. Because again, the king, he gets infuriated with Noland. And he sentences him to, I guess, a trial first, but it's really a sham. He has sham witnesses and stuff like that. But he sentences him to death. And at his execution, it very much parallels the King of the Pirates execution. And I was thinking about it, and I kind of realized they very much contrast each other. Because here you have the King of the Pirates, he's lived a great life. People are looking at him like, man, that's a great man. And he tells them about his gold, his treasure. Well, he doesn't say gold, but he tells them about his great treasure. It's out there, it's for anyone. So he inspires a lot of people to go out looking for his treasure. He kickstarts the golden age of piracy, and he just ignites the dreams in so many countless people, including Luffy. Whereas you have Noland, who actually found a city of gold, and everyone thinks he's a liar. They even start yelling at him, calling him a liar, and that was hard to watch because you know this might be perhaps the most honorable guy in all of the One Piece world, and everyone is calling him a liar. But the thing is, imagine how many people's dreams that crushed because now they truly believe he's a liar. It's very polar opposite of Roger's execution, where he kickstarts a lot of people's dreams and search for gold and treasures out there and adventure. A lot of people were like, oh, so this guy was just lying all along. He's not a great adventurer. They're just all lies. There's no city of gold. I very much see that as polar opposites, and I actually kind of like the way that they did that. But again, this scene is brutal to watch because they're calling him a liar and Noland is just breaking down. And again, part of it is probably because he doesn't like the fact that they're denying the existence of this people he knew. These people he became friends with. They're denying that they ever existed when they fought so long to make sure people knew that the city of Shandora existed. That's why the bell rings. It's because when you light the fire of Shandora, it proclaims the existence. So again, it just felt like so many layers to it. But a big part of the reason he's crying is because he doesn't know what happened to his friend. Like, he just needs any indication. But could you imagine if even before the moment he died, if that bell rang from way up in the sky, even if it meant, okay, it's not like it's going to save him, he would feel content with dying because he knows, okay, they're fine. The city of gold is in the sky. My friends are fine. And just that conclusion was horrible. But what happens with the Shandians is not much better. Because again, they're confused. They don't really know what's happening. Now, it was a little interesting what happened with the bell. Because the city, it falls on the beanstalk and the bell gets hit even higher into the clouds. So even if they were able to recapture the city, they don't really know what happened with the bell. For all they know, it was lost. But again, in a weird way, that actually protected the bell. Because Eneru ended up using all the gold, he ended up melting it down and stuff like that. I would assume had the bell been right where it was supposed to be when Eneru captured this place, he probably would have, I don't know, melted down the bell or anything like that. But even if that's not the case and he would keep it intact, if he had the bell, it would mean that he wouldn't even need to head around the beanstalk. It wouldn't give Luffy a chance to go up and fight him and defeat him. So again, like so much that happened that seemed like a negative back then, if anything, is actually a positive in the future because it helps Luffy. But then you see the Skypian's perspective, and the thing is, I had obviously heard what happened. I mean, Gunfall said it in a passing comment, which sounded kind of bad when he said it. It's way worse to actually watch it happen, especially after you've gotten connected with the Shandians. You actually feel a lot more for them than you did before, where it's just like, okay, I mean, like, they lost their land, that's obviously unfortunate, but again, you didn't have that personal connection with any of them. At least I didn't until that backstory where I really truly did. And they immediately attack, immediately take the land. But knowing that Calgara not only wanted to protect this land, but also he just needed to ring the bell in that moment because he needed to let his friend know, we're up here, we're fine, we're safe, we're in the sky. If you ever need to find us, we're in the sky. But again, he never did find that bell. He never did get to let his friend know that they were alive, that they were in the sky. They never got to light the fire of Shandora and proclaim its existence ever again. But it places so much more value and impact on what's happening in the current day with Luffy. Now, I even kind of said, like, the conclusion, you kind of knew it would be sad. It was way sadder than I was expecting. And I think the thing about it that makes it worse is that their lives ended and they didn't end in a happy way. So much was unresolved. But another big thing I liked about it was how much I understood a character like Wiper. Because he basically heard this backstory. He heard what Calgara's greatest regret was, that he wasn't able to let his friend know that they were in the sky. He was never able to see his friend ever again. And the worst part is, his friend died because he was trying to proclaim the existence of Shandora. And nobody believed him. I mean, it was just, it gets sadder and sadder the more I think about it, but also more impactful. But Wiper has basically taken what Calgara's mission was, and he's taken that burden upon himself, and he said, whatever it takes, I'm going to take back our homeland. I need to honor Calgara's last wish. I need to make sure that this regret of his gets solved. And sure, Noland is long dead, but his descendants aren't. And at this point, Wiper doesn't even know that his descendants still believe. They haven't lost faith, even though it's been so many years. It's, again, it's tough to think about. But much like how Wiper parallels Calgara, Luffy in many ways parallels Noland, because here you have this adventurer. He is so vastly different from someone like Wiper. The first thing Wiper does is attack Luffy, or at least that's the first thing Wiper does when they first arrive to Skypiea. It's the first one that they meet. They do not get off on good terms. They fight each other constantly. But Wiper's hope of saving his homeland from Eneru rests with Luffy right now. And I love how their stories parallel. But anyway, I feel like I've probably talked way too long about this. The more I've actually talked about it, the more I realize, man, it's so great. I don't know. What do you think about this? Maybe you have a different feeling about it, or maybe there's stuff I forgot to mention. I guess the one thing I forgot to mention was the snake, which I didn't know that the snake up here was actually a pet, kind of a pet of Noland and Calgara, so that's kind of interesting how it has that connection. Like, there is one living creature that remembers Noland and Calgara, and it's still up here, so that's kind of interesting. But anyway, what do you think? And if you want to see more of these videos, please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.